the UK government are trying to really raise the bar for cyber resilience. The law is potentially going to impact some MSPs to be regulated. It seems like the cyber assessment framework is the one that people need to get onto. They're the ones that actually want to do the good things by their clients and make sure that they're secure. If someone does break in, you're in a scenario where you could impact 70 other businesses and God knows how many lives. If I was an SME, I'd want a way of knowing that my MSP is up to a certain level. Is this MSP compliant? Yes, that means I'm probably more likely to get a good outcome.
Cyber Essentials is great, and if all the businesses in the UK had that as a minimum, that would be brilliant.
Yeah.
But it's really kind of the bare minimum. So do you think there's an opportunity for us with this regulation coming, and the fact we're going to have to learn more about it to help educate our clients better? Hello and welcome to the NGage podcast. We're here at the Network Group event in Bristol, and my name's Bruce Penson. I'm Managing Director of Prodrive, and I'm here today with Mit Patel from Assurix. So, Mit, we've just been doing a session earlier today on regulation in the MSP sector. So, reflecting back on it, what do you think are the sort of main messages that you took away from it?
Yeah, so I think what we spoke about was really relevant, and just really educating MSPs on what the actual cyber resilience bill is about. And if we break it down, it's like the UK government are trying to really raise the bar for cyber resilience. And ultimately, why it matters for MSPs is the law is potentially going to impact some MSPs to be regulated. Now, we did speak about them being the larger MSPs, like I think the 1100 that they've spoken about, and then probably being, 50 employees and above, maybe a lot bigger revenue size. But ultimately, at some point, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, every MSP is going to get impacted by this. And I think that was the big message that we uncovered there today.
Yeah. I think that actually what struck me was that the overwhelming majority of the room felt this was a good thing in our industry, which is good to see. Sometimes when there's big changes like this, it's not always welcomed. So I think that's really positive. It's a view I share as well. But it's probably difficult to sort of perceive at this stage, I guess, how it's going to affect our businesses individually. What's the impact of this regulation going to be, and what are we going to have to do about it? And what do you see that's coming down the line for us?
Yeah, so I think ultimately, MSPs need to align to some type of security framework, right? To make sure that they're better, the businesses are better, they're more secure. MSPs hold a lot of information and access to their clients, and there needs to be some type of adoption to make sure that they are doing the things they need to do to not only keep themselves secure, but to keep their clients secure as well. The government stance is the cyber assessment framework. That's what they're pinning this on. There are lots of things before that, like the cyber assurance, cyber essentials, etc., that are good stepping stones to be able to get there. But ultimately, in order for an MSP to get ahead of the regulation, whenever that happens, it seems like the cyber assessment framework is the one that people need to get onto. What was interesting, like you said, 75% of hands went up that thought this was a good thing for the industry, and that was quite eye-opening. I wasn't quite sure if there would be a bit more negativity towards it, but ultimately, the group in network groups seem to be people that don't necessarily represent the mass of MSPs. They're the ones that are probably a bit more forward-thinking, and they're what I bucket as good MSPs, right? They're the ones that actually want to do the good things by their clients, want to do the good things by the people in their company, and make sure that they're secure.
Yeah, so if you ask the same question of the 11,000 or so MSPs in the country, you probably wouldn't get the same proportion in favour of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the data set, I think it's 13,000 MSPs. There probably is not as many MSPs in a traditional sense that what's a network group or what is seen as an MSP, which is really an IT outsourcing in some way or service provider. It probably sits more around sort of 7,000, 8,000. But yeah, it'd be interesting to know what the demographic of people across all those MSPs think about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah, and as we were discussing earlier, there's a vast disparity in pricing in the marketplace, from MSPs at the lower end to those at the higher end. And, I think we all share the view in Network Group anyway, that those at the lower end can't possibly be doing, the right measure, or taking the right measures in terms of cybersecurity for their clients and in their own businesses, in their MSP businesses. At that price level, it's just not possible to do. You can't have the resources. Yeah. So there's got to be some way of differentiating them. And, you're talking earlier about what this looks like to a client. You go there and there's a checklist of boxes on one side from the lower priced MSP of all the features and benefits, and it's exactly the same for the higher priced MSP. So this is one of the challenges that we obviously have out there. I'm hoping personally that this regulation coming into the market raises awareness for the businesses that we're talking to, that actually there's more to it. And as I was saying earlier, we deal with regulated businesses. That's our client base. And I find it really quite amazing still that, if you're a lawyer or a financial services firm, you have to hire qualified people to practice, and you have to answer to a regulator. And yet, arguably, as an MSP, we're in charge of more critical elements of businesses of our clients than those businesses are, and yet it's like the Wild West really. We're not answerable to anyone at the moment.
Yeah, and I think like MSPs have a lot more access, right? So we have access to all of that information for our clients, all of their admin details, being able to get access to their data and all those things. So it is something that needs to be taken really seriously, because there's a lot of risk. The average MSP has, I think, 60, 70 clients, and hopefully this never ever happens, but it doesn't take much. It does take much to break into an MSP, hopefully a good one. But if someone does break in, you're in a scenario where you could impact 70 other businesses and God knows how many lives. And I think that's hopefully what the regulation, when it comes through, will try to fix and try to solve. That risk is at least mitigated where it can be by holding MSPs to a higher standard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing for me as well is that, there's obviously a lot of risk at the moment, but with this regulation coming in, I think it represents a lot of opportunities as well. And I think there was a comment earlier that actually this is a kind of effectively a sales sort of decision, or someone else has mentioned it's a marketing decision. Yes, we've got to do the stuff to meet whatever is required of us, but actually how you use it is how you market this to your client base. And that's what's going to differentiate you from companies who aren't meeting these requirements at the moment. So I think that's really interesting, because that's probably something that we're not doing at the moment. I did ask the room who was having these conversations with their clients right now, and only one or two hands went up. But actually, personally, I think these are conversations we need to be having with our clients. And it's in the national press, this regulation, right? So it's something that we can quite easily point our clients to very authoritative sources. This is a government bill, so you can't really get a much higher level of authority than that.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, if I was an SME, I'd want a way of knowing that my MSP is up to a certain level, like as much as I possibly could. And I think that would at least give me some level of reassurance. And I think whether you're compliant or not compliant is one way to check that, right? Like, is this MSP compliant? Yes, that means I'm probably more likely to get a good outcome from an MSP that's not compliant. And the next question an SME should be thinking is like, why is my current MSP not compliant? Like, why are they not taking this seriously? Why are they not doing what they need to do? Are they not as secure as someone who is compliant? And I think that may drive more MSPs to be compliant, but also will drive a better outcome for SMEs, because they're less likely to have an issue if they're with an MSP that is compliant.
Yeah, and going back to the sort of, I guess, potential risks from this regulation, one of the ones I raised earlier was that the MSPs who fall under it, whatever that ends up being in the end, I know that's still to be decided, going out and making a big deal of this, obviously, and using that as a marketing tool. And therefore, when we're in competitive situations with those larger MSPs, if we're not doing anything ourselves, we might be at a disadvantage there. Do you think that's a real threat?
Yeah, I think it definitely can be. I think it's interesting, the larger MSPs sometimes are run as enterprises, and SMEs normally want to buy from SMEs. So if it's a larger MSP that's running like an SME, yeah, I definitely think that could be an issue, because it's an easy thing to say. Your MSP is not compliant with this regulation. Would you have a solicitor who didn't have a bar or whatever? Law, what am I thinking of, Bruce? Help me out here.
So it's like SRA for legal, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, but what's the accreditation for solicitors?
Oh, right. Well, it's qualified lawyers.
Okay, so would you have a solicitor as an MSP, or even an SME that's not qualified? Probably not. You wouldn't get like a doctor who wasn't qualified either, would you? Probably not.
You would hope not, yeah. So do you know if the regulation, because I know it's based on the cyber assessment framework, the latest version of that, is there anything in that regulation about having qualified staff in your business? Because that's something like we talked about for lawyers, accountants or whatever. Will that apply to MSPs as well?
Yes, I think one thing is that from a security standpoint, if a member of staff is responsible for something, so let's take it in MSP world, let's say someone's responsible for backups, right? That actually needs to be in their job description. So it should be very clear to that employee that they are responsible for something. So that's one of the things that is easily applicable and understandable to everyone, right? That actually kind of makes sense that you're actually communicating to that employee they're responsible, it's in their job description, it makes sense. There's no kind of, there's nothing in there for like saying an engineer has to be this level or that level at the moment.
Yeah. It's probably quite a tricky one actually, isn't it, as well, because there's no kind of industry standard qualifications. Yes, if we're doing Microsoft stuff, there's usually a fairly defined training track there, but there's no kind of shared sort of generic qualifications across the industry.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, maybe that's the next step. Who knows? Okay, and I guess the next thing really is the timeline of all of this. Do we have a defined timeline for this bill going through yet? Because it's been in the offing for a while, hasn't it? And I guess due to changes in government and that kind of thing, it's been delayed. Do we have any sort of clear idea of when it's going to go through?
Yeah, so I think it's likely to pass this year. At the stages that are in, it got read, I think earlier on in January. They've had the second reading now. It's a bit of a debate scenario. So they're debating what's inside the bill, if anything needs to change, working out the specifics. That will take a bit of time in terms of that process before it does happen. So there is timescale on there. I think, like we said earlier, that the larger MSPs are going to get impacted first. But ultimately, what tends to happen, if you look at regulations such as the FCA type of stuff, the first thing they brought that in for was banks, and then rolled on a year and a half, they did it for insurance companies. And then over, I think it was another year and a half or 2 years where everyone was applicable to it that did financial services stuff. So I get why they would only want to do a certain amount to start with, because you want to bite off what you can chew, rather than saying, hey, we're going to regulate these 8,000 MSPs.
Yeah, and there is a question, isn't there, about the resources the government has to actually, they might bring out some regulation, but how can they actually sort of monitor it? I think it's the ICO is going to be responsible initially, aren't they? But, if you're talking about 13,000 plus MSPs, then that's quite a large number to...
Yeah, and it's quite a lot to scale by, right? So they're going to have to do various elements of feasibilities testing, scaling within that department, and work out how they're actually going to check if someone is compliant or not. We're not quite sure what that looks like either, whether it's going to be something that you have to submit or another provider that externally audits you. There's a lot of uncertainty around that, yeah.
And do you think, let's go a bit further down the line, regulation comes in and this starts filtering down through the MSP sector. What do you think it's going to mean for those MSPs who aren't doing a lot of this stuff at the moment, who, are running a sort of fairly lightweight operation? Do you think they'll continue to operate, or do you think they're going to get squeezed out the marketplace?
I think the challenge is that there's potentially a situation where MSPs could get dragged in to be regulated through the supply chain. So what I mean by that is, if their customer's customer has a customer that does have to comply to this, it may trickle down to them. And that's what most likely will happen to some of these smaller MSPs, that they will have to comply to it through the supply chain. And that may happen very quickly once the bill comes in place. We'll see some people just dragged into it. I think we did a survey I think 35% of MSPs have some type of customer that has CNI. You only need one customer to have to comply, right?
Yeah. I think there's some additional parts to the bill, aren't there? Whereas if you have an MSP of any size, if you have clients in certain areas, then you fall under the regulation as well.
Yeah, exactly that. So if you touch directly CNI, you're going to fall within it as well automatically. So some of the smaller ones probably just will either have to release those customers to someone else who can service them, or work out a way to align to the framework.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. And I think we're also seeing, and this is something we've seen in our business as well, that some of the EU regulations are now starting to impact us because we've got clients that operate in the EU. So DORA, which is the Digital Operation Resiliency Act, I think, it is one of those, and it's within within that regulation, it says if you've got any digital supply chain, they need to have it. Exactly, yeah. So I think that's a really good example of that, and I'm sure it's going to happen. And I can see the scenario where you enter a competitive process for some MSP work, so outsourcing contract or whatever, and then you get the due diligence questionnaire. It says, have you got this? Have you got this? Exactly. Have you got this? And at the moment, I mean, we're already seeing those. Have you got Cyber Essentials or Cyber Assurance or ISO 27001? They're kind of the usual ones on there. But other stuff's going to start appearing, I would imagine. Yeah,
I think definitely you're right. The supply chain is probably the most likely way that MSP is going to be impacted first. Definitely the ones that are in network group, right? Because I think there's not any ones that are on the larger scale that probably will be impacted. I think there's not many people who have more than 50 employees. I'm not sure the demographics.
Yeah. And when you look at, obviously you can go on to, well, not everyone watching this might know this, but you can go on to the I think it's on the National Cybersecurity Centre website and look at the cyber assessment framework. Mm-hmm. When you look at it as a small MSP business or any small business, it looks quite daunting.
Yeah.
Partly because there's a lot of controls on there, and partly because some of them are very, very grey. It's quite sort of vague speak for the different levels of each control. And I know because we've got clients, at least one client, maybe more, that have to comply with that now, and they're not particularly happy about having to do that because it's a lot of overhead, right? And they don't have the skills of the people internally who can interpret that either. So, what's your kind of advice for MSPs who are looking at this and thinking, right, well, we don't have to comply with this now, but we may do at some point, but how on earth are we going to, where do we start?
Yeah, I think some of the gateway entry kind of frameworks like cyber assurance help you get a bit closer to having to comply with the cyber assessment framework. I think part of the challenge is, you're right, it is quite difficult to interpret, am I partially compliant, am I compliant, is it this, is it that? That's part of the reason at Assurix why we've built a system to enable to help MSPs get through that process to be compliant, and we've made it quite prescriptive. So it's a bit easier to understand than if you downloaded that cyber assessment framework but PDF, right? But I think that every MSP should make a start somewhere to get to adhere to some type of framework to be able to work their way up to where they need to, eventually get to, which is looking like it's going to be the cyber assessment framework.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's an opportunity as well with our clients that we can use what will hopefully be some increased knowledge of cyber assessment framework, because we're all going to have to learn about it, it seems, to help advise our clients, even if they're not falling within that framework, to have better management of their cyber risk? Because I know we're all selling cyber essentials to clients now, and that's a great start, right? But I think, we heard the chap from Miasmi talking earlier, and he was saying it eliminates 95% of something or other, right? It's a term I've heard before. But I think actually as an MSP, Cyber Essentials is great, and if all the businesses in the UK had that as a minimum, that would be brilliant. Yeah. But actually it doesn't, it's really kind of the bare minimum. It's the way we see it anyway. So do you think there's an opportunity for us with this regulation coming and the fact we're going to have to learn more about it to help educate our clients better?
Yeah, and I think definitely if we take one thing like an example of MSPs normally have to patch their clients' machines, right? Now, as a business owner, you don't probably know what that patch level looks like because someone in your company is doing it, you're not quite sure, you've got no real visibility of it. So one of the things that you have to do is have cyber resilience as a board agenda item, right? And that will bring some level of reporting in that board agenda item to make sure you're looking at the things that you need to. So if you take that of what you need to do in an MSP and apply it to your customer, it's really bringing visibility on that board level that customer needs to have from a cyber resilience point of view. That should in turn make it easier to make an MSP's recommendations at least get visibility at the board level, because sometimes it might not make it up there to the board level, and I think that's going to be a really positive step for MSPs in trying to secure their customers. I mean, I heard the other day from an MSP, they were basically saying to me, we've taken on this new client, they've got Cyber Essentials, they don't actually they wouldn't pass Cyber Essentials. It looks like they've just passed it once and then not had the governance required to keep it going. And the customer turned around and said, well, this seems like too much work, we'll just take Cyber Essentials off. And it's that kind of mentality that hopefully can change through this process.
Yeah, and the other thing we've seen with Cyber Essentials as well, I think you mentioned it earlier, was that people just basically lie to get Cyber Essentials, right? It's at the basic level, it's a self-assessment, and you only need to know what you need to say. Doesn't need to be true, right, to get through it.
And I think that's on us as a community as well, because if we're doing that service, and not all the time MSPs are checking that Cyber Essentials stuff, but a lot of the times I've seen in the past MSPs are giving that Cyber Essentials questionnaire to the lowest cost resource in their organisation, saying fill this out for client Y or client B or whatever, and they're not doing it accurately. Sometimes they're not doing it accurately because they don't want to look bad, and sometimes they're not doing it accurately because they don't know what accurate should be in the first place, and that causes a massive risk to an MSP, because if that customer has some type of cyber incident or issue, they can refer back to them and say, you said I had this, and you said I did this, and you said X, Y, Z, and all of a sudden you've got yourself a big problem. And it's similar to cyber insurance. Like you've probably had it from your clients, Chris, where they're asking, can you fill this thing because we don't know what we've got. And sometimes MSPs are like filling this stuff out and they don't know what they're filling out again, A, and B, they're making themselves have a potential issue because they're filling in stuff that the client doesn't have. They think they're doing the client a favour because they're going to get cheaper cyber insurance, but they're actually making themselves culpable for the whole situation.
Yeah, and sometimes clients, I say sometimes, a lot of the time, clients don't appreciate that either because they just want the form filled out so they can get their insurance signed off, and they want it done as quickly as possible, and they don't really want you to say no to any of the questions, right? Because then they can't get their insurance.
Correct.
And they don't really appreciate the consequences of that.
Yeah.
And we run cyber incident response workshops every so often, and we kind of talk about to kind of set the scene a bit. We talk about what a cyber incident might look like and all these kind of things. And if you have to engage your insurance, like one of the things they're going to be checking is an example, your training records, right? Yeah. So we always say like who's doing cyber training, and it's mostly law firms and financial services firms. They're pretty good at that, right?
Yeah.
So, and they're all like, yes, yeah, we do it, or once a year or once a month or whatever it is. But then you ask, so are your training records up to date? And then you get a very different answer, right? So it's like, it's evidencing that stuff, isn't it? Evidencing that you're actually doing what you say you do.
Yeah.
And that's the tricky part. I think a lot of us, we're doing the right things, but we don't necessarily have the evidence of it.
Yeah, and I think if you take the example you used about the cyber incident training, part of the issue that I've seen as well is where MSPs are looking after clients in a situation where something goes really wrong, touch wood, it doesn't happen, you're the first person that's going to get the phone call. Most of the times, if a client does have cyber insurance, they're going to have some type of cover for incident response, but you're not going to know that as an MSP unless you ask for it. And I think that's another thing that MSPs could actively do is say, who is the incident response provider, what are their details, what's their number, what's your policy numbers? And that brings another question, like if your client doesn't have cyber insurance, they probably should.
Yeah, and what do you do as an MSP? I mean, do you want to lose that client because they don't have cyber insurance? You know, is that the point we're at now? Could be. It's a difficult question to ask, right? Because none of us want to lose clients. But if you've got a client who's not doing the right things, is that too much of a risk for us?
Yeah, and I think that's a two-way thing. So the first thing is that a client can represent a risk to you, it's not always the other way around. And the second thing is that if you're talking to a client and saying like, if you have an incident, who's going to deal with it? Because it's not going to be us, because we don't cover this, and we're actually not specialised enough necessarily. Not all MSPs will be to deal with this cyber incident. Therefore, you need to get this for your insurance. Like, we're not going to do it. I think ultimately, like, we're taking on a lot of risk by not advising clients to have cyber insurance. It's a different question if a client says, I don't want to have cyber insurance, and there could be reasons for that, and maybe you need to work through that. But a lot of the times we're not asking the question, and the question should be asked, do you have cyber insurance? And if they don't, next question is why, and then you explain why they need to have it. And one of those things is they need to have an incident response partner ready to go, and someone needs to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the other things that we can use, hopefully, the greater kind of visibility of this in general in business that this regulation will hopefully bring with it, is to educate our clients on the advantages of doing this stuff as well for their business. It's not just risk reduction, but actually they can go out, much like in our industry, that we hope to be able to go out and say, work with a reputable business. We've got all these credentials to show that we're doing the right thing. That our clients can do that as well if they're following the right advice, which is hopefully what we're providing them.
Yeah.
But then there's other companies they're competing with who aren't doing it. Literally just before we came into this room, I got an email from a client. They engaged a business development consultant. Business development consultant, one of the first set of questions here, because they're a professional services business, they've got lots of confidential data. He wanted to know about all their cybersecurity credentials. So that I thought was quite interesting. It's the first, we've had those due diligence questionnaires from insurers before, and for supplier audits and all that kind of stuff, but never as a sales tool. So I thought that's a really interesting sort of...
and I think there's more awareness because there's more cyber incidents happening. The whole reason the bill has been put forward in the first place was just the rise of all these cyber incidents that are happening. And, you can talk about Jaguar Land Rover and all the rest of it, but you can see the impact it has on people's lives ultimately. And I think it's just going to bring a lot more awareness. And ultimately, for an SME, if they outsource their IT provider, like, they should answer this question in this way. Like, if they're asked, what's your biggest cyber risk as your business? They should be talking about, well, it's actually the MSP that looks after us. They are the biggest risk. Yeah,
absolutely. I've got one last question. And when we first started talking about regulation in the network group, it was, I think, a couple of years ago now. Time's flown. But one of the sort of possible kind of risks of this, I guess, that was raised was the MSPs getting regulated. I think at this time we didn't know what sort of size of MSPs would be included in it, but MSPs were getting regulated. But then is that going to encourage firms to then go and have internal IT? Because they think, well, the cost of using an MSP is going to get too high now, but there's no regulation on internal IT. So do you think MSPs can counter that? We can use that to our advantage, or do you think that's a risk that might happen?
Yeah, I think ultimately, if an MSP is holding itself to a higher standard and doing more things to deliver a better outcome for an SME, that should cost a bit more money. I think ultimately, whether the client bears that cost or the MSP bears that cost is not sure. But ultimately, if you've got a good MSP that's doing all the right things anyway, they've already got the right mindset, and it's probably not going to take that much more to get to where they need to get to. So there shouldn't be a huge amount of burden and cost they have to encounter. However, I think the challenge is going to come for the less mature MSPs, for the ones that aren't necessarily delivering good outcomes to SMEs. But I think it's a good thing because it's going to raise the bar for the whole industry. And the good MSPs should win.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Mitt. That's a great finish to the podcast,
Yeah.
I think, there. Certainly, I take that as a really good outcome from this. And I know, the MSPs and network group, we are forward-thinking MSPs. Everyone's keen to continue to raise the bar, I think. So hopefully that puts us all in good stead.
Great. Thanks for having me on, Bruce. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks.
Thanks.